On January 2nd, 2012, hundreds of theme park fans descended on Universal Studios Florida. But they weren't there to ride The Mummy, or Men in Black, or The Simpsons ride, or Shrek 4D. These guests came to the park for one reason: Jaws was closing. In its 22-year tenure at the park, Jaws the ride had become a beloved favourite of guests, for its theming, its action, its immersion, and its history. And even now, more than 10 years after its closure, it's still remembered fondly by many, with a cult-like following, ranking high in the all-time lists for Universal attractions. So today, let's take a look at the history of Jaws the ride, the attraction which I and many others consider to be Universal Studios' greatest ever ride. Much like most of Universal Studios' opening day attractions in Florida, the origin story of Jaws the ride begins across the country, at Universal Studios Hollywood, on the park's studio tour. As mentioned in my video on Universal's worst ride, Fast and Furious Supercharged, Universal Hollywood's Studio Tram Tour features several mini attractions as stops along the tour, like the downhill flood effect, the earthquake, and of course, Fast and Furious Supercharged. Some of these attractions have been around for decades, while some have rotated in and out with changing trends and new movies Universal wants to promote. And in 1976, a year after the release of Steven Spielberg's famous film, the studio tour opened an attraction based on Jaws. After leaving the earthquake set, the tram pulls into another set modelled after Amity Island. Multiple New England beachfront buildings surrounding an artificial lake, with several boats in and around the water. In the current iteration of the attraction, guests in the tram spot a shark fin swimming in the water as the Jaws music plays, and another animatronic, a police diver, poking his head above the water nearby. The tour guide tries to warn the diver, but it's too late as he's pulled underwater and mauled by the shark. Then the tram moves behind a pier, which is also pulled away by the shark, who causes a nearby fuel pump to explode, resulting in a big fire effect. Finally, in the climax of the scene, the large animatronic shark, submerged in the lake on a rail system, jumps out of the water and swims down the length of the tram, lunging at guests as they move on to the next part of the tour. This attraction has featured on the Universal Tour for 47 years, and as a result has undergone several changes over its lifetime. The centerpiece of the scene, the final giant shark animatronic, originally was designed with long pointed teeth, intended to make it look more like the famous movie poster. However, this effect made the animatronic look more ridiculous than scary, and the shark quickly earned the nickname Carrot Tooth. In 1978, the shark was updated to remove the carrot teeth, and was remodeled to look more like the shark in Jaws 2, which had just released that year. The teeth were again remodeled 2 years later, but this time with the rest of the shark remaining the same, and the Jaws 2 design still surviving today. The police diver is also a relatively new addition to the attraction. For the opening of Jaws, the shark's first victim was instead George the Fisherman, a dummy who sat in a small fishing boat and was dragged underwater by the shark. George underwent a handful of costume changes over the years, before finally being replaced in the year 2000. Until 2005, the stop also included Ben Gardner's boat, the screen-used prop from the original film, docked at the side of the lake, and the original Orca, the boat used by the film's main characters. According to Jaws director Steven Spielberg, he used to visit the boat from time to time while working on the Universal lot, as a way of keeping in touch with his very first Hollywood blockbuster. Until one day in 1996, when he visited the attraction and discovered that the Orca was gone. Dismayed, he called up the head of the Universal backlot to ask where it went, and was told that the boat had been destroyed and cut up for timber. Lastly, the Hollywood attraction had an effect where the entire tram would tilt towards the shark at the moment it pulls the pier, simulating it trying to pull guests into the water. But this was put out of service in the mid-2010s, presumably due to reliability issues, and was eventually sealed in concrete. Alongside other mini attractions on the studio tour, like Earthquake and the King Kong encounter, Jaws was a popular key stop on the Hollywood ride. And in 1990, with the opening of a brand new park on the other side of the country, Universal looked for ways to bring Jaws to a new audience in Central Florida. On June 7th, 1990, Universal Studios Florida opened to the public, a brand new movie studio theme park conceived around the same time and built in direct competition to the also newly opened Disney MGM Studios. While Universal Studios in Hollywood originated as an existing movie studio with a theme park annexed onto it, the new park in Florida was sort of the other way round, with the park being the main focus and various movie studio elements added on, more to provide a sense of authenticity than anything else. What this meant was that unlike in Hollywood, Florida didn't have a large backlot for guests to tour through. And while there was a tram tour of sorts in Florida, it was nothing like the flagship attraction that existed on the West Coast. But the park was still in need of some big budget attractions to bring guests in, and so 3 of the mini attractions from the original studio tour were brought over to Florida as standalone rides for opening day, more fleshed out than their Hollywood counterparts, but still maintaining the same central identity. The first of these was Earthquake the Big One, based on the Earthquake attraction. Then there was Confrontation, based on the King Kong encounter, and lastly, Jaws, just called Jaws. Jaws the Ride is a name that's just typically given to it by fans to distinguish it from the movie. If Universal was to compete with Disney, it was important for Jaws to be every bit as much of a blockbuster as the original movie, and so they spent $30 million on the new ride, the equivalent to $70 million today. At the same time as Disney was working with George Lucas to build new sci-fi attractions at their parks, Universal also hired Steven Spielberg to serve as a creative consultant for the ride, alongside another opening day attraction, E.T. Adventure. The brand new Jaws ride would sit in the San Francisco/Amity area at the park, among several buildings themed to Amity Island from the film. Instead of a tram tour, the ride would be a boat tour, similar to that of Disney's Jungle Cruise, where a boat was guided by a skipper who would narrate a story to the guests. However, this version of Jaws was not the version that guests came to love. The original version of the ride that opened in 1990 had guests take a boat tour through Amity Harbour, which is interrupted by multiple attacks from a shark that stalks the tour, much like the Hollywood version but on a grander scale with multiple scenes. This version of the ride featured 2 noteworthy effects, one where the shark would emerge from the water and bite the boat, spinning it around, and another in the finale where the shark would be blown up and shark guts would be sprayed into the air, just like in the finale of the movie. The intention with Jaws was to make guests feel like they were experiencing real movie effects, and the hope was that the ride would be one of the park's most popular attractions. However, when opening day finally came around, this wasn't exactly what happened. In short, the original Jaws ride was a disaster. The 2 major effects rarely ever worked. The explosion would have trouble resetting for the next load of guests, and would often not fire at all. And mainly, the effect where the shark bites the boat caused significant problems, as the animatronic used real shark teeth glued into its mouth, which, due to synchronization issues between the shark and the underwater turntable that spun the boat, would occasionally actually bite the boat, causing real damage. The level of precision needed in this and a lot of other scenes, combined with the size of the shark animatronics, also caused real problems for the ride. The drag created by the sharks suddenly needing to move underwater at high speed caused them to break frequently, and the ride was constantly breaking down. Evacuations quickly became a daily occurrence, and Universal team members eventually took to telling guests that Jaws was broken even when it wasn't, so they could avoid disappointment when it eventually broke down later in the day. There's even a story that Steven Spielberg took his family to the park for opening day, but ended up spending a lot of it stuck on Jaws after it broke down during their first ride. Additionally, in July 1990, one guest fell into the water after a boat railing allegedly broke, coming dangerously close to one of the shark animatronics, which, considering these had real teeth, is a terrifying thought. And according to the news story, when he was pulled back into the boat, guests applauded, thinking that the incident was just part of the ride. Both Confrontation and Earthquake also experienced frequent breakdowns during the park's early days, but these were able to be brought to a more manageable level over time. But Jaws was not so lucky, and Universal were furious that their blockbuster attraction had become more of a box office bomb. And so in August 1990, after only 2 months of off and on operation, Universal closed Jaws for a refurbishment, and sued the company they'd hired to design the ride for failing to properly design the effects. And eventually in 1992, hired a new third party, the Totally Fun Company, alongside several others to redesign the ride. The redesign resulted in a brand new and more reliable ride system being installed. New shark animatronics were provided by the company Oceaneering, and importantly, the two effects that had caused the original version of the ride so much trouble were scrapped. Instead, the boat biting scene was replaced with a gas dock explosion, similar to the one on the tram tour, and the finale was replaced with a version closer to the ending of Jaws 2, where the shark is electrocuted by biting a cable. The general story and structure of the ride remained the same, and with the reliability issues mostly fixed, Jaws was able to reopen to the public at a ceremony attended by Steven Spielberg in the spring of 1993. And it was this new version of the ride that was the one that most fans know and love. The story of the ride begins as guests arrive at Captain Jake's Amity Boat Tours, a company offering scenic tours of the Amity Harbour. The businesses of Amity Island have been capitalising on the success of the movie Jaws, which, according to the ride's story, was based on a real shark attack that happened in their small community. Outside of the ride, you would find the iconic hanging shark photo op, which drew guests' attention to the attraction. The ride's queue consisted of a series of boathouses near Amity Harbour, featuring various fishing and other nautical artifacts, including a small number of real props from the movies, such as Chief Brody's jacket. And outside of the boathouse were also two boats used in Jaws: The Revenge. While in the queue, overhead TVs played a broadcast from Amity's local TV station, WJWS Channel 13. This was nearly an hour-long loop of a fictional local talk show called Hey There Amity, which was intercut with commercials for Amity businesses, including the boat tour itself. As guests board their tour boat Amity 6, they're greeted by their skipper, who welcomes them aboard as they set off on a tour of the very spots across the island where the 1974 shark attacks took place. Across the water, they see several New England waterfront homes, including the house of Amity's Chief of Police Martin Brody, the main character from the original film. As the tour continues up towards the Amity Lighthouse, it's interrupted by a distress signal from another boat, Amity 3, and as Amity 6 rounds the harbour wall, guests find the remains of Amity 3 torn apart and sinking with no survivors. Shocked, the skipper radios into base to call for Chief Brody's help, when suddenly a large shark swims past the wrecked boat, animatronic fins poking above the water. The skipper spots it and freaks out, grabbing a grenade launcher and attempting to shoot the shark as it swims under the boat, rocking it back and forth. The skipper fires twice, creating two water jet explosions, but misses both times as the shark disappears. The tour then escapes into a nearby boathouse to wait for Chief Brody to arrive. Inside, the boathouse is dark and creepy. The skipper brings the boat to a stop and looks for a place to tie it up. Suddenly, a noise is heard, and a small fishing boat drops into the water. Scared again, the skipper tries to move the boat on, but it won't drop into gear, as more noises are heard around the guests. Finally, the boat begins to move, but as it does, the shark leaps out of the water as guests get their first glimpse of the shark head on. The boat escapes and moves on to the area with the gas dock. As they emerge from the boathouse, Chief Brody radios in to say he'll be there in 10 minutes. The skipper replies there'll be shark bait in 10 minutes and pulls out the grenade launcher to defend the tour. On the other side of the boat, the shark surfaces once again and the skipper fires the grenade launcher but misses and hits the gas dock instead, causing it to explode in a fireball. The skipper then takes the boat to a nearby fishing dock, conveniently right next to a high voltage electrical barge, telling the guests that they're going to unload to get away from the shark. As they pull up to the dock, the shark surfaces again and heads towards the boat. The shark leaps head on at guests, but as he surfaces, bites onto an underwater cable from the barge, causing it to spark. The shark sinks back underwater and emerges a few seconds later, charred and dead, as it was electrocuted by biting the cable. The skipper radios back to Chief Brody and says there's no need for his help anymore because the tour has defeated the shark, and everyone celebrates. The skipper then asks everyone to please keep their little fish episode to themselves to avoid the tour company and all of the other nearby businesses having to close down, and lastly, the guests pull into the unload dock and exit the ride. The new version of Jaws proved to be a big hit with guests, and it's easy to see why. The theming and set pieces of the ride were incredibly immersive, with many guests remarking that the ride felt like they were right in the movie. I remember when I was much younger and rode this for the first time, it really did feel like there was a real shark stalking the tour, that could just attack at any moment. The ride was a perfect blend of edgy and exciting, but also fun and comedic, and the 7 shark animatronics placed around the ride were nothing short of spectacular. To increase reliability, the systems that operated the animatronics had been completely redesigned. Each shark was now powered by the equivalent of a 500 horsepower engine, able to move through the water at 6 meters a second, which is very fast for a giant fiberglass shark, and each of them sat aboard a 12-ton hydraulic lift, able to spring them out of the water to attack the boat. While the first version of Jaws had cost Universal a hefty $30 million, the re-engineering of the new version had cost an even higher $40 million, showing Universal were willing to spend anything they could to make the attraction work the way they intended. The sharks were definitely the stars of the show, and are still very impressive even today, especially when you consider how large they are, and the fact that they operate underwater. In my opinion, they're up there with equally impressive giants like Dinosaur's Carnotaurus and the original working Yeti from Expedition Everest. Beyond the impressive animatronics, I think what made Jaws such a great attraction is the attention to detail when it came to its theming. In my opinion, good theming really is what makes or breaks an attraction. The boathouse queue and the surrounding buildings of Amity Island were really well detailed and much larger than something you'd typically expect from a theme park. In fact, the ride had an entire island in the center of its lake that guests couldn't even get to, that's just used for themed buildings, like Chief Brody's house. Later on in the ride, the boat also passes a church, which has no connection to the story, but purely exists just to add to the theming. It's this sort of scale of set design that made the ride feel like a lived-in world, and helped you feel more immersed in the story. And really, when you look at theme park rides that are widely considered to be the best, this tends to be a characteristic among all of them. The lobby in Tower of Terror, the museum in Expedition Everest, the entire queue of Harry Potter and the Forbidden Journey, and the whole of the Haunted Mansion, all of these feel like they have so many areas that you could explore beyond what you get to see on the ride, which gives the attraction so much more depth. The queue videos also do a great job of adding to this depth of storytelling, because again, it's just more stuff you wouldn't necessarily see from a one-time ride through. So in that way, I guess what I'm trying to say is that Jaws the Ride has a real re-rideability to it. And all of those other great attractions do as well. This specific type of in-world video is also just something that I really like to see on rides. They do it really well on Jurassic Park River Adventure as well, and also Kilimanjaro Safaris in Animal Kingdom. Overall, I think Jaws had all of the different elements that make up a great theme park attraction. It had a great story, immersive theming that was really fleshed out, great special effects, it was exciting, and was also just a fun ride experience at its core. After its 1993 reopening, Jaws had mostly fixed the original version's problems, although it did still occasionally suffer breakdowns, needing to be refurbished at one point in the 90s due to oil leaking into the water from various machinery throughout the ride. It was also closed for a period of time in 2005 due to increased petroleum costs from a particularly bad hurricane season, and only experienced seasonal operation throughout 2006, finally going back to normal operation the following year. But for the most part, Jaws enjoyed over 2 decades of operation at Universal Studios Florida, garnering a cult following among hardcore theme park fans. Today you can still find many tribute websites and videos online, which thanks to all the fans of Jaws, has made researching this video so much easier. However, as Universal neared the end of 2011, things were about to change for the classic attraction. Jaws was great, but it was getting old. After all, it had technically opened with the park, and even though it was still visited by many guests, for the casual Universal guest, there were far more exciting, newer attractions to visit. Revenge of the Mummy, Hollywood Rip Ride Rocket, Men in Black Alien Attack, The Simpsons Ride, Shrek 4D, these had all opened since at the Universal Studios park. But to be honest, I don't think any of those were the reason why Jaws' days were numbered. Because more significantly than that, in 2010 at Next Door Islands of Adventure, Universal opened the Wizarding World of Harry Potter, their largest, most expensive project yet. And while Jaws had been a blockbuster ride back in the 90s, by modern standards, it was starting to look pretty small. And with the overwhelming success of the Wizarding World of Harry Potter, Universal planned to greatly expand their Harry Potter attractions into their main park as well. And simply put, they just needed space, which was something that Jaws had. And so in December 2011, Universal announced that after 21 years, Jaws would be closing. This was of course met with major backlash from hardcore fans of the attraction, just as had happened several years earlier with Back to the Future. Now there's no actual evidence for this, so take this with a grain of salt, but I've even heard a rumour that Steven Spielberg was so furious upon finding out that they were closing Jaws without consulting him, that he demanded that E.T. Adventure never be closed without his permission. Some people even say that he threatened to remove all of his other IP from the parks if Universal ever did that, causing it to still be the only opening day attraction left in the park. But there was nothing that could be done, and on January 2nd, 2012, the Amity Harbour boat tours set off for one final time. As a final send-off, Universal Studios set aside 48 exclusive tickets for what they called Jaws: The Final Voyage. These would be given out to various guests throughout the attraction's final day, inviting them to be on the very last ride ever. Many guests rode multiple times over the course of the day, until at 9 PM the ride closed its doors, and the final voyage set off. Jaws' final day is well documented on YouTube, with many videos, including several from that very last ride. In fact, there's one ride video out there from earlier in the day by Theme Park Review that has nearly 300 million views, which may well be the single most viewed theme park video anywhere on YouTube. If anything, this should show you how big the cult of Jaws was. There are so many ride-throughs of this video on YouTube that just have millions upon millions of views. So I looked up theme park on YouTube and sorted by views, and it looks like this is the second highest viewed theme park video ever on YouTube. And the first is like some weird kids video, I don't know. So it's pretty much the most viewed video. But with that final voyage, Jaws was well and truly closed. The following day, construction walls were put up around the attraction, and in the following months, Jaws was demolished. In 2014, the replacement to Jaws opened its doors. Universal opened Diagon Alley, an expansion to its Harry Potter areas, complete with an Ollivander's wand shop, the Escape from Gringotts ride, an animatronic fire-breathing dragon, and a Hogwarts express train to carry guests back and forth between Diagon Alley and Hogsmeade in Islands of Adventure. The area is really cool and super immersive and detailed, but there is still a part of me that will always miss Amity Island. But there are still some remnants of Jaws in the parks. In the window of the record shop that marks the entrance to Diagon Alley, there are several records on display containing references to various Universal properties. One of these records is named Here's to Swimming with Bow-Legged Women by the Quint Trio, this being a reference to the character Quint from the original Jaws movie, who sings a song with those lyrics. Also, in the window of Mr. Mulpepper's apothecary, you can find a pair of shark jaws tucked away, which is a reference to, you know, the Jaws from Jaws. And of course, the hanging shark that used to sit outside of the ride wasn't demolished, but was instead moved to the waterfront in the San Francisco area of the park. Lastly, although the ride is now gone from Orlando, it hasn't disappeared completely. The mini attraction that predated the ride still exists on the studio tour in Hollywood, and in 2001, a version of the ride began operation as an opening day attraction at Universal Studios Japan, which actually does still exist today. The ride is almost identical to the Orlando version, but with the narration in Japanese. So if you really are desperate to ride Jaws again, you can always take a trip out to Japan. But I hope you enjoyed my look back at Jaws the Ride. In my opinion, the very best ride Universal Studios has ever made. Do you agree? If there's another Universal ride you think is better, let me know. And what are some of your memories of Jaws? If you liked the video, please consider subscribing, as I'm always working on more theme park content for this channel. And in the meantime, check out some of my other videos. If there's something else you'd like me to cover on the channel, please let me know. And as always, I'll see you next time.